Hey there, Dr. Mark here, and today I'm going to show you the exact steps to start working with a nutrition client. I have 3 examples of real-life clients to show you this process today, starting with one that's super straightforward and ending with one that's going to make you put on your thinking cap. So let's dive in with client number 1. Okay, so the first client we have here, client number 1, is a male. He's 195 pounds, 37 years old, and he is 6 foot tall even. He is extremely active, being a personal trainer that is constantly on his feet, working 8 to 12 sessions per day. For goals, here's what he wants to accomplish. So my current fitness goals are to gain muscle mass and strength while getting more lean and losing body fat. My eating windows are small because he's training all the time, so I'm trying to maximize nutrition during those times. Okay, so how do I know this? I know this because I asked him about it in my coaching application. If you want the exact form I use to get clients to apply to work with me, write the words apply below in the comments and I'll get it over to you. From this form, I also got a sense of what he felt was holding him back. And here's what he said. My struggle is that I'm not sure my other macros are sufficient enough for my energy needs. I have never used a food scale and I've tried using food track apps in the past, but I failed to do it consistently. I love advice on my carb intake and healthy fats that won't push me over my calorie needs. Okay, perfect. So as a nutrition coach, this is someone I can help. Body composition goals, which are losing fat and gaining muscle, as well as he wants to learn how to eat to get there. This is completely in my wheelhouse, so here's what I'll send him next to get things started. I want to get a sense of objectively where his nutrition is at and what from those numbers is holding him back from reaching his goals. So I'll do this by doing an assessment with him and getting him to track his intake for 3 to 5 days without changing a thing. This gives me a much better idea where he's at with his nutrition and dietary habits. I want him to weigh himself during this period a few times as well under similar conditions. He's going to track his food intake using an app, something like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer or even MacroFactor. Now, some clients are going to want to do journal entries like logging everything manually by hand, which is fine, but we want him to log foods and serving sizes in an app so we can look at the numbers. We don't just want what they eat, we want how much they eat. This is truly how people gain weight and how they lose weight. It's not black and white. And here's what I saw through his time tracking and taking a look at these numbers. All right, team. Okay, we have client number 1 here. Just to refresh you, we got a male, 195 pounds, age 37, 6 foot tall. He's very active, personal trainer, doing a bunch of sessions per day, constantly on his feet, doesn't have tons of time to eat. That's impacting some of his food decisions as well as some of his goals. We're going to go over what we're seeing here. Really, what I want you guys to think of and kind of my mindset around this stuff right now is that as a nutrition coach, we need to prescribe a certain level of food for people. So we got to get a better idea of how much energy they're burning. And there's a few ways of doing that. We can use a calculation, which you're seeing right now, using the Harris-Benedict equation to pump in some information about the client and where they're at and how active they are to get a number. This gives us activity levels of around, for this individual at maintenance, 3355. I like to do things in conjunction with this. I like to add to it by getting a better sense of what they're actually doing by getting them tracking, which I've already suggested here. So this client supplied some information, 5 days worth of tracking. We can see from the actual numbers here what they did. Keep in mind, he had mentioned that, he hasn't always used a food tracking app, although he's using it right now. So there's going to be a little bit of just in human nature underreporting going on here, but also that can skew the numbers a little bit. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just something that we need to keep in mind as we're looking at this here. So we're comparing the calculation numbers, which are, the textbook says they're true, but are also can be influenced by other things and can give us sometimes, typically with males they're pretty close, but sometimes it's just like a little bit higher than we would expect based on what we're seeing here, which might not be quote unquote right in terms of super like the actual numbers, but it's a reflection of what they feel they're doing, and we can use that information because it's a bit closer to the entire process. With that being said, what we're seeing with this individual here, the average is on average he's eating around 2,100 calories over these 5 days. We also see that his weight came down around 2 pounds total over this process, which makes me believe that he's already in a calorie deficit. So we had those maintenance levels. This is at 2,100, which is to be expected, a calorie deficit. That is confirmed by, if we take this average for calories, divide it by his body weight. It's also confirmed by how much energy he's consuming on a daily basis, which is 24 kcals per kilogram. So his energy per kilo of body weight, maintenance values for that are between 30 to 35. So at 24, he's already at nearly a 20% deficit, which we're seeing. So what we're trying to determine is where we set his food levels to help him reach his goals. Remember, he wants to get leaner as well as put on some muscle, so do things concurrently. So we want to keep him closer to maintenance, or maybe even a little bit of a deficit to start. What we're seeing here is that he's already in a bit of a deficit, what we're seeing. So my first thing I'm thinking is we'll add in a little bit more food, not tons. He came to us to get leaner, so we don't want to add too much in and him to actually gain weight, because that wouldn't be happy with us. So we'll do that as the first change and probably shoot closer to 2,200, 2,300 calories is what I'm thinking immediately. Let's look at the macronutrients and where these calories are actually coming from. You can see in this process, this is something that I'm describing to the client as I'm going over this data. It's great for showing value, showing your expertise, giving specific individual direction. Clients love it, and it takes someone that is curious and sort of exploring the idea of coaching, and it takes them through this process, and it's not uncommon for them to be like, what is the next step? I need the next step. Tell me what it is. In terms of macronutrients, the first thing I'm seeing right off the bat is protein's in a good place. He had mentioned that he does try to get enough protein at 2.35 grams per kilogram. He's right within the optimal range. But the one thing that was even surprising to me, given he's a personal trainer, is quite active, is his carbohydrate intake. Quite low at around 1.18 grams per kilogram. So keeping the calories somewhat the same and the protein similar, but bringing the carbohydrates up, and if anything, maybe bringing the fat down, because it's 0.5 to 1.0 is, a narrow range. This could even be 1.5. This is a chart that I use all the time, and you throw the numbers in and it calculates everything. It's smack dab in the middle, if anything, maybe a touch high given what his goals are. So in terms of first steps, and what I propose is that we kind of get a better sense of what he's eating and where these calories should come from. What this would look like for this individual is I'm going to add in more carbs, shooting for closer to 150 grams of carbohydrate, 200 grams of protein, and 100 grams of fat for 2,300 calories. He should be able to get away with eating a little bit more food, still get leaner, especially with the boost in carbohydrates that'll allow him to train harder, have more energy, push harder, and all that stuff. And it's essentially like a net wash with the additional energy expenditure. That's where we'll start. We'll adjust things through time. This doesn't need to be where it stays forever. And that's what, being a good coach is all about, is just adjusting things through time. And that's what we'll do moving forward. Another thing to think about with this stuff is that, even if there's levels of food, calories, and macronutrients you want to get to be optimal, you can get there through time. You don't need to start there. And if anything, that might be too much of a shock for a client starting right there, right off the bat. Hope that makes sense. So as you can see, getting clients to track serves a few purposes. It allows you to give expert insight into their specific individual situation. It pre-qualifies them and shows if they'll actually do the work. It gets them used to what they'll need to do, and it takes them from curious to paying very quickly. This client is rocking and rolling and ready to get started, and I'll follow up in a future video on how they're doing. But now let's move to client number 2. So client number 2 is a female, 229 pounds, 31 years old, and 5'7". She's a busy mom of 3 and just recently had her third baby. And I'll explain what this means for her and her coaching in a second. For goals, here's what she wanted to accomplish. So this is in her own words here: get back into my best shape, just had my third and final baby, looking to spend the next 6 months working on me. I had the goal to be in my best shape for my 30th birthday, but ended up being pregnant, so hoping to get there by my 31st birthday in July. And here's what I saw through her time tracking. All right, so we have client number 2 here. You'll remember that this client is a female, 229 pounds, her age is 31, 5'7", and she's recently given birth to her third child. She is motivated and ready to go in terms of weight loss and has got the green light from her healthcare provider, and that's where I step in and am ready to support and guide her. She's very motivated and ready to get after it, and I'm always, as sort of the voice of reason, balancing out how hard she wants to push and where she's going, with also prioritizing recovery and her overall health in this period. a few notes. It's important to tease out where she's at with breastfeeding. She has let me know that she's actually not breastfeeding this child, whereas in most cases, breastfeeding can add to energy expenditure somewhere around 200 to 300 calories per day. So we keep that in mind when recommending food levels for weight loss here, but this isn't going to factor in too much. Again, always trying to balance out where she wants to go with what is still healthy and appropriate. I feel confident in this situation, so I'm ready to push ahead and take a look at what she's doing. Couple things. So she gave me 3 days worth of data, which is fine to make some interpretations and base things on what she's doing. In terms of the Harris-Benedict equation, this had her around 2,700 to 3,000 calories depending on her activity levels. She's got 3 kids running around, so I can imagine she's quite busy, especially with a relatively new baby. In terms of what I'm seeing here, so energy intake, first thing I'm looking at, on average around 2,000 calories per day. This puts her at, based on her body weight, 19.59 kcals per kilogram. She's in a deficit already, closer to 30%. And we are seeing a subtle drop in her weight as she's tracking through this period, which makes sense. The biggest thing I'm seeing right there, so we're not going to change food levels too much. Again, even starting there or slightly lower is not a terrible place to start. I'm going to make a slight drop here just to keep things moving. The biggest thing being her protein intake is on the lower end of things. And I know that, based on these numbers individually, she can get to at least 112 grams. So we're going to aim closer to that each day, keep things much more consistent. And that bump in protein, as well as what we're seeing, keeping her calories the same or slightly lower, is going to keep her feeling energized, higher levels of satiety. If anything, she might feel like it's too much food. What you're going to find in a lot of these scenarios is that clients will go from, again, we're encouraging them to eat normally during this period, don't change a thing, but they'll go from eating normally to making more whole food, less processed choices with more protein and vegetable intake. And if anything, they find like it's too much food. So we're balancing out that as well, while taking their goals into account. Protein would be the thing that we're seeing on the lower end of things for sure, so that needs to increase. Carbohydrates, based on weight loss, an optimal range at maintenance for most individuals is between 3 to 5 grams per kilogram if they're moving quite a bit. Hers is right below that. 2 grams per kilogram isn't uncommon for someone already in a deficit, which we're already seeing. So we're going to base some numbers based on that. Slight decrease in calories, just subtly, starting with 105 grams of protein, 215 grams of carbohydrates, and 65 grams of fat. Once I've described that to this client and kind of said, hey, this is what you need to change, calories are going to stay similar. There's not going to be huge changes here, but we're going to get you eating a little bit more protein. Let's create some strategies to work that up. And that'd be the first thing I would attack. And that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting here in terms of what you're trying to achieve. What my coaching would look like, and this is where I started to describe that. You're a good fit for my coaching. I want to tell you what that would look like, because I think we can build on this and get you results much more effectively, faster, and in a more fun fashion with a little bit of guidance and attention. So I'm going to tell you about that. You're good for my coaching. What you would do is track to these targets throughout the course of the week. And then when you're done tracking here, I'm going to set you up on Monday check-ins. When you're done tracking here on Sunday, once you finish eating, fill out all the objective information here in terms of calories and macronutrients. Go to the top of this sheet, click on this check-in form, and submit this for me. This is going to ask some subjective questions on how your week went. Good things, things to improve, reflecting on the week, and then I'll do a voiceover check-in just like this to give you a review, next action steps, things to improve, and the direction moving forward, and then we'll continue on. So that's what I would describe at that point, which is it's just a natural segue into what coaching would look like. And most clients really appreciate that part. They don't feel like they're being sold to. They're ready to jump on board and take that next step. So as you can see, after I do my assessment, this is when I start to explain stuff like this. Explain why they're a good fit for my coaching, how we'll execute the plan, and how we'll actually check in. Extend an offer to move forward, and explain the investment in my coaching. I go over all of this in a Loom recording with everything that I'm seeing, and then I insert that link into an email so everything's on paper. I'll give some idea of timelines and what to expect, but I mostly address how I help, and we can go over more specifics about the timeline and that type of stuff as we go. So I've done this process nearly 3,000 times over the last 10 years, and about 80% of the time, if I get a client to this point, they will sign up. It is really effective, so I do encourage you to do something similar. Now let's move on to my last client example today. Remember, this client is a bit more challenging, just given the goals and the timeline, so let's dive in. This is client number 3. She's a female, 159 pounds, 5'6" tall, and 34 years old. She's competing in a high-level strong woman competition in the next few weeks, which does have a weight class, which makes this situation a bit more complicated. For goals, here's what she wants to accomplish. So she wants to maintain her weight after 12 weeks of cutting from around 76 kilos to 69 kilos, which for most of us working in pounds is around 167 pounds, this is my mental math happening right now, to a little bit closer to 152 pounds. Over the last little bit, she's been trying to reverse diet back, but her weight keeps increasing. So she's trying to find that balance between how much she can eat right now and stay within the weight class. And she needs a little bit more help with competition day nutrition and water cut protocols, which we're gonna detail a little bit later. So here's what I'm seeing from her data. Okay, so we got client number 3 here. You remember this client is a female, 158 pounds, age is 34, and she's 5'6". She is competing in a strong woman competition coming up in just a few weeks. So it's a weight class sport. So we got to be specific around some of the numbers. She's no stranger to tracking, and she's sitting in a pretty good spot, albeit a little bit higher than most athletes, looking to cut weight. We'll talk about the specifics of that in a second. Here's what I saw from the actual assessment. She had mentioned before we started too, she's like, my protein was higher when I did this tracking. I'm not necessarily sure why, but it was, which we're seeing, right off the bat at 2.46 grams per kilogram, pretty high. Just in terms of reference standards and stuff, you'll hear a lot of people talk about, 1 gram per pound of body weight, or 2.2. She's above that already. Not uncommon for someone in a calorie deficit, which we're also seeing at 23.46 kcals per kilogram. But on the higher end of things for sure. Given the fact that she wants to maintain her weight, if not lose weight, because she needs to cut almost 3 more kilos here. She's kind of right around that 72.5 mark, or 72 kilos. She's getting closer to 69 kilos for the weight class in a few weeks. So we're going to have to do some water loading and food manipulation techniques, which I'll discuss in a next video. And even if you've seen my video with Connor Lutz talking about weight cutting and stuff, I discussed some of those things there. But we're going to have to do some of that stuff. Typically, we have to do some of that stuff for athletes that are sitting around 3% above their body weight, just to get them in. Depending on the athlete, we kind of get a better sense of what they need to be doing to succeed at their sport. And she's going to be doing some heavy events with strong women and that type of thing, but be a bigger athlete than the rest of their competition, and that's where this stuff ends up being an advantage for them. So what I'm seeing here is, if anything, she can get away with probably eating a bit less protein and more carbohydrate. And she had mentioned, in terms of her movement, she's moving quite a bit already at 10,000 steps per day, but I don't want to bring her food down anymore, and I would love to see the scale go down a little bit more before we do some of the short-term stuff. So we're going to start closer to 150 grams of protein, 140 grams of carbohydrates, 50 grams of fat, and shoot for closer to 12,000 steps per day as a starting point. Get her a little bit closer to that 157 mark, and then make a short-term cut to take off the rest of the weight. Hope that makes sense. We'll follow up with this client in terms of how things are looking for competition. So we're stepping into a little bit of a tight timeline here. It's a bit intense, but I am pretty experienced, so I don't mind. But this is also a good time to remind you of a few things. Before someone starts working with you, you want to get them to, number one, apply for coaching. Number two, collect just enough information to make an assessment and to show the value of your coaching, but not so much that it adds too much friction before you get started. Where someone who's just exploring coaching thinks, well, this is a lot of work, I'm not gonna do this. And then once you got the ball actually rolling, you're gonna collect more information. Asking further questions around what's worked well in the past, is there any other medical information that you should know, and what type of support they have in their social circle. This is all gonna inform coaching moving forward. And that's it, folks. Those are 3 examples of getting started working with a nutrition client. Next time, we're gonna go over how to check in with those clients. Now, as great as all those tips are, if you're really serious about starting a nutrition coaching business, the next thing I'll have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. Now that you know how to get started working with a nutrition client, find out the exact steps to check in with them step by step. So make sure to check it out now, and I'll see you in the next video.